Recording in progress.
All right, so this is December 17th, 2024, and I am moving out currently. That's why if you can't see my hair, it's because I'm like I have a webcam instead of like it's the outside webcam instead of an inside webcam, but I have long hair now. Anyway, we are moving out. I like this space for one reason, and that reason was all that light. So pretty. But yeah, okay, let me see if one second. No, that made it worse. No. That's fine. All right, that works for me. So, moving out. Today is my last day here, just cleaning up everything. Everything's been moved out, but just saying goodbye to a space is always sad. See, my forest is all gone. All my fake forest is gone. So now we're going to finish up today with, I'm just going to finish with the philosophy of science content. And then after that, we will probably go back to the metaphysics, and it's probably going to be outside somewhere. We're going to be taking some hikes, I guess. I am genuinely afraid to have housing. I'm genuinely afraid to be in another housing situation after 3 really bad housing situations. And you know, anybody who knows me knows the police didn't do anything. In fact, they made it worse. They went on the side of a fraudster, even though I came to them first about somebody trying to extort my nonprofit $4,000. Like, who does that? Who extorts a nonprofit? Yeah, they tried to extort $4,000 of. They tried to extort $4,000 of my labor, making a lease that said it was that I moved in 2020, and it is pretty clear that I moved in 2022, and my neighbors, who were amazing, they helped me move. They were just fantastic. One of them is a teacher, just like me. She helped me move. Thank you so much. And they also introduced me to a new math teacher lady, Donica, and apparently she was an actress and she was a math teacher. That's cool. So they were very nice about her and things. She like was very popular back in the 80s. And anyway, so the fact is, I got extorted for my labor just having this nonprofit 1 year in. And that was just from living here. Just living here, they wanted to extort my labor. So anybody knows me, because I had a previous harassing experience before this, which was why I was here, where the house manager was just like picking on me instead of any of the other girls. And there was no reason for it, because I was like, I had the least people over. I was probably the quietest. Wasn't gaming, wasn't having people over, because I didn't want to go through that, and yet I still went through it. And that one was a similar situation. So I just don't want to do any of that at all. I'm really afraid of being housed anymore, because I don't want to go through even one more of them. I also, I'm also afraid of getting a more full-time job because of what I went through at CMAR. So, you know, of course, I completely, whatever little space I even slightly opened up for the police is just gone, which is probably for the best, because, you know, my community in general just says, yeah, that's the police, I'm not going to do anything for you. So even that little bit of hope was getting alienated from them. And they don't do anything, just like the community said they didn't. So, uh, yeah, so I don't really, I'm too scared to even try to get housed anymore. I don't want to go through this again. I don't want my nonprofit to get extorted. I don't want to, I just don't want to deal with it again. So that's where I am right now. The problem is that it does make it hard to get my cat back. So I'm probably eventually going to have to move in somewhere. Um, but yeah, I'm genuinely afraid to apply to housing after these experiences and the fact nobody did anything about them. So we're gonna jump down to the science because it is my favorite thing to do. And here we go. Okay, so we're gonna continue. Is everything present? Okay, just had a little freeze up there. Let's keep going. So everybody knows that we left off around here. We're talking about the philosophy of science. This is the Tangle of Science. So we're going to keep going. So let's start here. Finally, we should note that sometimes it is not altogether clear whether our products on the shelf or not, since scientists often disagree about the reliability of the product, sometimes even with good reason to back up both sides. So we're talking again about the philosophy of science. Science is something that we really appreciate because it is reliable and because its product is reliability. And reliability means that we can build with it. Good construction material doesn't fall apart. You can build a foundation on it. You can get everything going. And that's something you want. You want something with as little holes, as little questions left as possible, so then you can build something stable. And when you shake it, it's not going to fall over. So that's why we pick science. And keep going. So reliability is the ability to do what repeatedly says on the label. I take an antidepressant every day, and I hope that it gets rid of my depression. It does. Do what it said on the label. What can secure that virtue? So science, the virtue there, I really like that use of virtue because it says reliability is virtue. It's something that, it's not considered beautiful, but it is beautiful because without it, you can't have anything worthwhile. If everything just falls apart, it doesn't really matter how good or bad you are at anything. You can't build on a stable foundation. So one of my favorite, my heart is going out to Russia because Alexei Navalny has been probably killed. I mean, it's like, everybody has to say this lie that, they don't know, but everybody knows he was killed. And that just tells you the state of Russia, that you can't even say what you know to be the truth. Everything's just flawed. So we say that what can help secure that virtue? Yeah, so we can't build anything without reliability, and reliability is the thing on which we can have art, we can have, math, we can have education, we can have society. These little gaps that we think don't really matter, that we can just say whatever. Something in the back of your head is like, okay, it's okay to just say whatever and build. It's okay to say whatever and build. And then before you know it, you're just like completely relying on pronouncement, which is just like somebody says something and that's the truth. And that is not healthy. So we keep going. The scientific method, of course, what we usually learn in school is that it is hypothesis, and then you have your experiment, and then you have your discussion, and then you have, your method is determined by your experiment. You run your experiment, hypothesis is proven or disproven. You write up your analysis and you conclude, and your experiment is over. So, however, there's a lot of things that are not as cut and dry, so we're going to go through those. Objection 1, any characterization is broad enough to cover everything that recently gets counted as science, from gravitational wave theory to thermometry to COVID-19 vaccine research, that is key, to measures of democracy, to the theory of gender conformativity, and so much more, will be so general as to lack content. We discussed the relatively familiar point in section 1.1. Using the term scientific method is dangerous. Privileging methods narrows the scope of what science is up to and what is needed to evaluate it. This is the topic of section 1.3. So we keep going. Falsificationism is the idea that you take something and derive false implications from it, and then you can say it's not true. So if I say social contract exists, and then I have strong evidence doesn't exist, then I have used falsification to prove the antithesis, which might have been my original intention, which was we're in a state of nature still. Okay, so hypothetical deductive method. This one is interesting. We kind of talked about that previously, but this is called a counterfactual method. It's when you assume something to be the case, and that is other than how the world is. That's a counterfactual method. Causal process tracing methodology tells you to pick cases to study where the hypothesis is most likely to fail if false. Yeah, so this one is very important. So what you do here is you go through your hypothesis, you think about how you're going to perform your experiment, and then you think, okay, this place right here, that is where it's going to fail if it's false. So here's an example that was pretty interesting recently. Like you may or may not know, I run a subreddit called R0 Narcissist, which is taking the scientific reality of narcissism and bringing it past pop psychology. So this is like thorough, very good NIH, which is the National Institute of Health, other kinds of research like that. All of that is pointing to real narcissism. And one of the most interesting ones was today, we were doing one on Never Forgive, Never Forget, which is the one of the statements by Anonymous, which is, a hacker group that has anonymous, people without any identity. They appear with masks, they appear with code names, and they hack people. And they usually do it for political reasons. And a lot of it has to do with what is mentioned in the sexual contract, which essentially is more of this male nature. So like, you got to beat your dad, and you got to beat your dad and show that you're the top male now, and that you get all the chicks now. And like, that's really what Anonymous is about. They pretend to be about social justice. They pretend to be about justice in general, but really it's just about like, screw dad, hack Pentagon. But when it actually comes to really vulnerable people that cannot do anything for them, they're nowhere to be found. So it's just your typical who's the new king kind of deal. Anyway, going back to that, so they were talking about how they tested for narcissism in these people, and they were looking for over emotional responses to the word, I think it was discredited and insulted. Yeah, discredited and insulted. And the other two that they said were not sufficient to test for narcissism were, I think it was like angry and frustrated or something like that. So essentially they were using these words to see if they had reactions that were like unreasonable. And so I would go back and I would use this causal process tracing and say, right there is where your hypothesis that narcissists overreact when faced with certain terms that prime them to be narcissistic, that part is going to lead to falsification, because discrediting and insulting show that you have a good you have a good concept of justice, because to be insulted or to be discredited without good reason, and there's not really too much of a good reason for insulting and all that, is actually a good way to test that the person is not a narcissist. They're just, and they actually react to things that are screwed up. Now, if you had somebody reacting to like that answer you came up with is logically wrong, and then they were like really getting upset, that would probably be a better measure, because logic, unless they have a lot of narcissistic abuse experiences of like teachers that didn't know what they were doing and then were saying things were wrong logically, if they don't have those, then they might actually, when we say it's logically wrong, essentially we're saying that this thing is not something you can argue with. So if you get upset about it, that is probably a very narcissistic person, right? If I'm like gonna challenge you on 1+1=2 because it just makes me so mad, that's different than someone who's like, well, let's open our minds to possibilities and things like that. Like, somebody just gets mad when 1+1=2, it's probably a narcissist. But someone who's like, well, can we outthink the paradigm where I like agree 1+1=2, but like you don't want to think all the time in those kinds of terms, because you might oversimplify things that don't have a vocabulary yet, for instance. So, those are two different people. One wants you to be more open and is trying to give you leeway for more empathy, and the other one is a narcissist, just like you laid down the law in some way and it was pretty inarguable and they got to push back on that. Those are not the same people. Okay, so we continue. Continuing, and we're continuing. So now we are in new territory. The whole idea of the scientific method can be vague, incomplete, and ultimately uninformative and unuseful. Yeah. So if you just think, oh, I have science and that's good enough, that's not good enough. Because if I think science is saying, science says blah, blah, like yes, it could be true that you read a headline and it was an actual scientific study and it said blah, blah. But if you have not done your due diligence on it, you haven't done science. You've read something. It's great. It's great to have read something. It's better to have read science than not have read science. But you need to do your due diligence on it, and that's part of the scientific method. So just being like, oh, respect science and science, it can kind of give it a bad name, because people are like, oh, science is a big daddy and it'll take care of you if you just say go to science. But if you don't actually look into what is being done in the science, you can be very vulnerable. And that was happening a lot in COVID-19, where people are like, well, the science is this and science is that. It's like, well, did you go into science and like take a look at it and just make sure everything was checking out for yourself? Because you know, anybody who has been a father, has been their own father, has had paternal nature, has had not paternal nature, has been fathered with something, they know that a father is a human. And if you want to do the big daddy thing, you got to be understanding that science is a human, and it has parts of it that don't necessarily work. There are parts, like for instance, I'm reaching out to a professor right now because there was a citation in one of the articles I was reading, and it didn't actually back up what they were saying. And so that actually shows that, unless you are really being careful with science, it can fall apart. It's not impossibly perfect, right? So that is what we're talking about here. Keep going. So trying to like speed through this because we've been going through a lot. Even the strongest examples of formally designed methods, falsification and Bayesianism, give different answers depending on the concrete assumptions on which they rest. Okay, so what they're saying is, even though these are solid ways of determining something using science, that doesn't mean that science always means one thing. So I could say the science says, but if the science is that using falsificationism, it'll say one thing, and if it's using deviationism, it'll say another thing. And those are not necessarily the same thing that they say. So, you know, scientists kind of which method, right? So that's what they're saying. And they call this method fetishism. So it's not possible to separate the method of content from science and the method changes, okay? We're gonna keep going. They talk about randomization. Randomization is like one of the problems in science because I can say I randomized the method, but it actually didn't. So yeah, they talk about gaming the system, right? So yeah, so basically gaming the system means that you're essentially we talked about this before, but essentially you have equations that lead to randomness and don't actually create a random situation. So, or you believe that it's a random equation and it should create randomness, but it actually doesn't. So that is what we mean by that. We continue. So what do we have here? Kind of got all kinds of ways we're going. So we're saying fewer postulates or hypotheses are going to be superior. So basically simplicity is better for your mind to understand. Yep, and then we got Occam's razor, which is a good old guy who says that the least explanation, like as in the simplest way of explaining something, is probably the best way to do it. And science tends to have that effect. Like today, I was kind of commenting on the psychoanalytic piece, and as good as it was, I do feel like certain parts of it hit the nail on the head harder, insofar as if I was interested in depersonalization or dissociation, I should probably just look up the science on that, and then it can speak very clearly and precisely, like it's like a spell, you know, like very clearly and precisely about what I'm talking about insofar as dissociation, personalization, and then it just like hits on the head, and everybody's more satisfied and reliable results. So Occam's razor. Keep going. Keep going. Okay, so then we do talk about Kant. He is probably my favorite analytical philosopher. In the first critique, and this is, I believe it's critique of pure reason. Yeah, it says, it was appealed to by Einstein, and it says, for him, physics should aim at explaining the widest number of facts from a smaller number of assumptions or axioms. Is that aesthetic? It could be. It could be aesthetic to just mean less, right? And I think it is. It's, you know, having more can sometimes be useful. So let's, you know, going here, we can see our heliocentric model of the solar system. We got a beautiful sunflower there. Going. Yeah, so I'm just kind of speeding through this. Right across. I love Occam's razor. I don't see too much in here that is like super, super important. Okay, and then dealing with objection. So parsimony is along with fruitfulness, unifying power, novel prediction, prediction, internal coherence, and many more, in a set of what philosophers call theoretical or epistemic virtues. We continue. Continue. Second, the kinds of methods that promise highly reliable outputs given reliable inputs generally answer very narrow questions. These are the methods we label rigorous. Okay. Answer questions about causal prediction, causal generalization. The causal prediction is, going back to it, it says, will it have effects in the same population at a different time or in some different population? So will I be able to have effectiveness in the similar situation? And can I rely on it? Does it often or always have that effect? So those are very powerful parts of science in general. Dealing with objection 3, the truth and reliability. Continuing. So assuming confirmation is possible, they offer a host of accounts of how to import data from theories, like formal schemes of inductive inference, confirmation theories of various ilks, or inference to the best explanation. It's important to bear in mind how seriously pervasive and consuming this focus is. Pessimistic meta-induction. Okay, pessimistic meta-induction was first formulated by Larry Lawton. A classic reductive version is due to Peter Lewis. Assume that the success of a theory is a reliable test for its truth. Most current scientific methods are successful. The most current scientific methods are true. Then most past scientific theories are false since they differ from current theories in significant ways. Many of these false past theories were successful, so the success of a theory is not a reliable test for its truth. So this is inductive, and it's, it's pessimistic insofar as over time science does actually become better. Therefore, even though science is the best in a given time, it can even be better. So if you were to look at a theory and be like, oh, that's pretty good, and then somebody else is saying like, well, it can be better. Yeah, pessimistic meta-induction says, yes, this could be better. So that is one reason to, kind of have a little bit of skepticism about like the ways that people just like jump on these trains. But maybe not too much because it can still be pragmatic, right? So, we got some Quine. And despite the impressive records of its theory and deriving predictions or explaining facts, none of these achievements could speak in favor of truth over the theories apparently equivalent. Okay, so they're talking about underdetermination and pessimistic meta-induction, but they're saying, don't let it lead you astray about science in general. But these all come from physical sciences, typically the relativity of motion, as pointed out by Lawton and Lepelin. So they're talking about underdetermination. got some talks about what science is and how it works. We're still going. Still going, still going, still going. I would have mentioned CERN, data collection. We urge a refocus from the acceptability or truth of theories and claims to the reliability of the panoply of outputs the sciences produce. So what we're saying there is that it's acceptable that theories and claims are, so the accessibility part, we're talking about underdetermination and pessimistic meta-induction. So essentially, like, even if it is acceptable that I have come up with this conclusion using this method, using this hypothesis, etc., there's still like a whole plethora of meta ideas about how it will test over time, if it is the best, if it is as powerful as it could be, and the reliability of it, again, that's how powerful it could be. So I got some in defense of reliability. Reliable for what? So we have Chang, suppose Chang is right. The fact that these claims are true does not mean they can be lifted from the source practices in which they are embedded and certain into current science, so like ecological kind of understanding of method. All right, so I think right now we're into the depths of it. We already talked about this printing money leads to inflation idea. That essentially means that if something increases, money may be printed and yet inflation will not ensue because people just save it under their mattresses, right? They don't spend it. It's a spending power, and the readjustments there that usually cause inflation. Ensuring your concepts are meaningful. So, you know, if I talk about narcissism, what am I talking about? Another good example is there's two that I've really seen in scientific reviewers are like, you know, we really need to specify what we're talking about. The first one is politics. So pretty much any paper you read about politics will kind of like, what is it? What is politics? And there's a lot of different pushback, very political term, ironically. And then there is fascism. Fascism is another one where you're like, well, what is it, right? So knowing that your terms are meaningful, don't start a philosophy argument in the middle of the science argument and have everything clean and ready to go so that you can measure it. Not that we don't need philosophy for science, but do it in one of these books, which is a great one. We got a hypothesis, archaeology. Ensuring your validity tests are themselves valid. So how do we measure something is valid or not, and making sure that actually makes sense. So let's take this example. This one is actually interesting. So they're taking a post-conviction risk assessment, and they're ensuring their validity tests are themselves valid. So they say these post-conviction risk assessments are research-based, and they inform decisions about the imprisonment of high-risk offenders, the release of lower-risk offenders, and the prioritization of treatment services to reduce offenders' risk. So this is very problematic because it's gotten very wrong, and people can program it to be wrong to just like attack political dissidents, and there's all sorts of things that can happen. So the principal concern is that the benefits in crime control will be offset by costs in social justice. They'll have an adverse effect on racial minorities and the poor. So Attorney General Eric Holder in 2014 said it may saturate unwarranted and unjust disparities that are already far too common in our criminal justice system and in our society. Basically, it will make criminals out of people that could have been exceptions simply because of their identity. Criminal sentences must be based on the facts, the law, the actual crimes committed, the circumstances surrounding each individual case. So basically, he's making a claim, innocent until proven guilty. Don't mess with facts, right? Even if it's for science's sake, don't mess with innocence until proven guilty. It should not be based on changeable factors that a person cannot control. The possibility of future crime has not taken place, right? I can think within, like, this is very important to think about statistics. Like, I can think within a very high degree of certainty that this will happen. Like, I can have a 75% certainty that something is going to happen. But until it happens, all I can ethically say is there's a high possibility. Because if it hasn't happened, either my method was wrong and it got a higher possibility than it could have been or should have been, or it's actually one of the exception cases, the other side of it. So in this case, it's 1 in 25% that wasn't covered. And if I'm always so busy, if I don't understand statistics, I'm always so busy saying, oh, because there's high likelihood, then it will happen. I don't actually get it because there's 25%. It's still a good deal, right? That's a good deal that are not going to do it. But because they treated them like it was all going to happen, now they are going to do it. Now it's going to be almost 100%. I almost messed with the probability, if that makes sense. So yeah, don't mess with innocent until proven guilty. So they're saying it's not going to reduce disparities. It's going to make everything more racist. There's recidivism, complex and controversial social notions. So these are all the different descriptions that we have in science. I'm going to read them because they're all cool. We got theories. Those are large-scale ways of explaining the world, laws and principles, things that you can break down and say, yeah, this is what that is. Local claims, descriptive and predictive. Bridging principles, models, classification schemes, methods, practices, concept development and validation, measures, evaluations, devices, and materials, model organism statistical analysis, and other applications of mathematics, including approximation techniques, data curation, classification, and dissemination of narratives. Okay, so I think for now, we're 20% through. I'm still getting through it. I'm gonna go through and really just like take apart the parts that are worth it, and we're just gonna cover those. So 20% through, we have 4/5 left. We'll be getting to that later. Okay. I will see you guys in the next video. Here is a hug from science. Okay. Stop here. See you guys next video.